Now, we're in James chapter 2, verse 21, reading from the King James Bible. Quote, "Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he had offered Isaac his son upon the altar?" Unquote. Reading this from the Amplified Bible. Quote, "Was our father Abraham not shown to be justified by works of obedience which expressed his faith when he offered Isaac his son on the altar as a sacrifice to God?" Unquote. Now, reading from the Young's literal translation, quote, "Abraham our father, was not he declared righteous out of works, having brought up Isaac his son upon the altar?" Unquote. Now, let's go ahead and parse this. Was not Abraham our father justified? Let's do parsing on that one. It's written in the aorist tense, so it's characterized by its emphasis on the punctual action, that is, without the concept of the verb being considered without regards to past, present, or future. It's written in the passive voice, which represents the subject as being the recipient of the action. And it's written in the indicative mood, which is simply stating a fact. Continuing. Justified by works. When he had offered. Now, when he had offered only happens two times in the Greek in the King James Version. Here in this verse, and then again in Hebrews. Quote, "Who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplications with strong crying and tears unto him that was able to save him from death, and was heard in that he feared." Unquote. Now, let's parse out this "when he had offered," the Greek word anaphero. When you parse that Greek word, it was written in the aorist tense, which means it was characterized by its emphasis or punctual action without the concept of time, past, present, or future. It's written in the active voice, which represents the subject as the doer, the performer of the action, and the participle mood, which basically means add an ing or ed. In this case, it was an ed. When he had offered. Continuing. Isaac, his son, upon the altar. Now, the altar, this particular Greek word, was used 279 times in the King James Version. So, when you look at this just literally, was not Abraham our father justified by works when he had offered Isaac his son upon the altar? In other words, when he placed him on the altar. Nothing else, because he didn't kill him. So let's go on to John Gill's commentary of the Bible on this particular one. Quote, "Was not Abraham our father justified by works?" Unquote. Not as the causes of his justification, that is denied. In Romans 4:2, Paul wrote, quote, "For if Abraham were justified by works, he hath whereof to glory, but not before God." Unquote. Continuing, "But as effects of it, showing the truth of his faith and the reality of his justification, he had both faith and works, and the former was known by the latter, and even the faith which he had expressed years ago was manifested, demonstrated, and confirmed to be true and genuine by the instance of his obedience to God, here produced, by which it appeared he was a true believer, a justified person, approved of God and loved by him." Now, if this was the case of Abraham, the father of the Jewish nation, yea, the father of the faithful, of all that believe he is, it must be a vain man that talks of faith without works, and his faith must be a dead one, and he be very unlike the father of them that believe. The good work incident in is the offering up of Isaac. Quote, "When he had offered Isaac his son upon the altar." Unquote. "For when he was bid to take his son, his only and beloved son Isaac, and offer him up on one of the mountains that should be shown him, he made haste to do it. He provided everything for it. He split the wood and carried it with him, and fire in his hand. He built an altar, laid the wood on it, bound his son, laid the wood on the altar, and his son on the wood, stretched out his hand with a knife in it to slay him, so that it was all one with respect to his intention and will, as if he had actually offered him, and was a full trial and proof of his obedience to God. This was not the only act of obedience or goodwill which he performed, but this being a very eminent one, the apostles' incidents in it as a very considerable evidence of his faith in God and love to him, and which showed him to be a justified person, as he was long before he performed this action, even before Isaac was born. See Genesis chapter 15, verse 6. Reading from the King James Bible, quote, "And he believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness," unquote. Continuing, "And therefore it can never be the apostle's meaning that he was justified before God by this, or by any other work or works, as cause or causes of it, but only that he was declared to be so, or in other words, that his faith was attended with good works, and evidenced by it." End of John Gill's commentary on James 2, verse 21. Since James is the first book that we're doing on discovering scriptures, let me give you a clue on this. Abraham laid Isaac on the altar. He was going to sacrifice him, believing that God would bring him back from the dead. But when he drew the knife up into the air to do the act, God called out, stopped him, and then replaced his son with a ram that was in the thicket, caught in the overgrowth. And so he unbound his son after God told him to stop, and put the ram up. God just wanted to know, will Abraham give God everything, including his most precious promised son? And Abraham showed God, yes, I do. God tests our hearts. I'm going to tell you something. When I got saved, God took me aside. I had promised him everything of mine was his. Everything. So I became a servant to God to take care of all of his things, and never to misuse them, not to give them to anybody, not to sell them, not to do anything. Everything that I owned was his. One day he told me, I want you to go to the bank, take a couple of grocery bags, and I want you to empty out your vault. And I will instruct you how to give it away. And he did so. He took my entire retirement. I had no idea that later he was also going to strike me with cancer and take away everything that I had, to which he did. But at the time, I obeyed, and I did so. He also told me that he wanted me to go back to work and make up the time that I had misused. I took like 4 hours that I needed to make up, to which I did after having a discussion with him. He said, obey me, don't justify. So I did everything he wanted me to do, and I picked up all the stuff from the bank, which were material possessions that I had invested in for almost 20 years. He then took about 2 or 3 weeks, if I remember correctly, and gave me instructions on how to get rid of it, the church, the poor, etc., to which I did. When I was done, I had nothing. I was living paycheck by paycheck. I was no longer rich. And I learned the freedom of not having to worry about thieves, my investments, all that stuff. I had the freedom of being a little child trusting in God to take care of my needs. My paychecks were good. They took care of my bills at the time. And then later on, I lost my job. I got stricken with cancer. I lost my home, everything. And I learned how to rely on God to take care of me when I was abased. And then, of course, he healed me, and I'm here now. And I can see why he took all that And it's been many years. Today was the first time I realized, thinking back on it, oh my goodness, if he hadn't done that, my future would not be so bright as it is now, because I won't rely on utilizing that stuff to make my future, which is good because that was definitely second-class stuff and not what he has taught me to be the better stuff. So it really blessed me so much so it's unbelievable. But I stepped out on faith. And I'm telling you, God richly rewards you back, especially if you're helping the poor. When you're following His instructions and you're helping the poor, He will repay you big time and quickly. Okay, let's have more fun as we learn all these great things from the Scriptures. Thank you for listening to Discovering the Scriptures. Please hit the like button below and subscribe and tell others so that we can spread this word and understand it, you and me both. God bless you.